Before we can start developing our web application, we have to install the .NET 5 SDK, Visual Studio, and Postman. The easiest way to get all this is simply by Googling for it. Let's start with the .NET 5 SDK. Depending on when you are watching this course, there might be different versions of the SDK available. As you can see in my case, I am working with a preview version of the SDK. In your case, it might be already the released version. Anyways, choose the proper version for your operating system and install it. I'm working with a 64-bit Windows system, so I download and install the 64-bit version. To get the Community Edition of Visual Studio 2019, again, just Google for it. And again, depending on when you're watching this video, you might have to pay attention to the actual version you're installing. If .NET 5 is officially released, everything should work with the current version of Visual Studio 2019. But in my case, I have to get the preview version of Visual Studio. As you can see in the Visual Studio installer, there's a preview and a non-preview version. The .NET 5 SDK currently only works with the preview version. So to make this clear, if you're working with a preview version of the SDK, you better get the preview of Visual Studio. If you're in the future where .NET 5 is officially released, just get the current released version of Visual Studio. One more thing, when you're installing Visual Studio, make sure to check ASP.NET and Web Development to install all the necessary components. Last but not least would be Postman. We will use Postman to test our Web API calls. That's it. Sounds simple, and it is, but that's still very helpful, because we don't have to build a front end ourselves. So just search for Postman and install it. That's it. When everything works, we can start to build our first web application with .NET 5.